Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's video will be a response to anyone who has a hard time understanding why vaccine hesitancy exists and why it's so prevalent in Black and other minority communities. There are actually many very valid reasons why people choose not to get vaccinated, but their voices are often just dismissed and they are quickly labeled as ignorant or as anti vaxxers. But the main reason I can think of is simply that they do not trust our government. And honestly, the government has given them good reason. The most famous historical event is, of course, the Tuskegee experiment, which was a very wicked study carried out by our government and the CDC to study the effects of untreated syphilis. The government basically lied and told African American men that they were being treated for syphilis when in reality they were given placebos. The researchers let the men suffer and even die even after developing a cure for syphilis. Another event that led to government distrust is that during the late 1960s and the early 1970s, our government adopted a policy of involuntary surgical sterilization, which was imposed on Native American, Latin, and Black women in the United States. These procedures were performed without the women's knowledge or understanding. These policies were put in place to control what they called undesirable populations. And think about it, the 1970s were not that long ago, and even if people did not live through these events, their attitudes about government and medicine have been carried on and passed on throughout the generations. So, to put it simply, the government has broken the trust of the community in the past, and many people still do not trust them. But to make matters worse, we have some very contemporary incidences that have led to government distrust. One example is them allowing toxins in government approved vaccines. One of the biggest reasons why parents are hesitant to vaccinate their children is the fear of mercury and other toxins in the vaccines. And this is actually an understandable concern because for years our government did allow vaccines to contain thimerosal, which is a mercury based preservative. And thimerosal is a well documented neurotoxin. In fact, thimerisol's own manufacturers describe the additive as a potentially dangerous neurotoxin that could accumulate in the brain. The company's 1999 material safety data sheet noted that exposure in children may cause mild to severe mental retardation. But let's listen to Dr. Fauci lie to us anyway.
For joining us. Let's get straight to some of these claims. Kerry says about mercury, quote, they say mercury in fish is dangerous, but forcing all of our children to be injected with mercury in thimerosal, that's a preservative in vaccines, or was used in vaccines, is no risk. Does that make sense? So, Dr. Fauci, tell us about thimerosal. Is it dangerous? Is it in vaccines?
No, it's not. First of all, it's not dangerous, and it is in very, very, very few vaccines. The only one that is in is the influenza multivial.
I'm actually surprised that Fauci gave a hard no when asked about thimerosal. Usually, they kind of skirt around the issue and say stuff like, we have no evidence that this is harmful. Kind of what you hear when they talk about the COVID vaccine. And while thimerosal was removed or only allowed in trace amounts since 2001, it is still in some vaccines. And the question many people have is, why is it used at all? Surely there must be an alternative. And if they would approve this toxin, what else are they okay with allowing into vaccines? This is why many people choose to err on the side of caution and completely opt out of all vaccines.
Are there still vaccines in doctors' offices right now today that contain thimerosal that are being given to children?
I don't believe so. No, as I mentioned, all vaccines for the routine recommended childhood immunization series started 2001, have been manufactured either thimerosal-free or with markedly reduced amounts of thimerosal. Now, that's just the vaccines that are in the routinely recommended childhood immunization schedule. As I had mentioned, influenza vaccines, which are not part of that routinely recommended schedule, but were encouraged to be administered by the ACIP, although they're not yet part of the routine schedule. Those are now available in a thimerosal trace formulation for both Evans vaccines and Aventis Pasteur vaccines. As I mentioned, Wyeth announced its intentions not to manufacture an influenza vaccine after this year, but the other two do offer this trace thimerosal presentation.
But
However,
but they still have thimerosal in them.
Yes, they still also have multi-dose vials that do contain.
Why don't they go to single-dose vials?
I know that they are considering the feasibility of.
Why don't you tell them to do that?
We consider these vaccines, which also contain thimerosal as a preservative, to be safe and effective. However, we do consider that it's important to have vaccines.
Did you hear any of the testimony earlier from those people that were testifying, those scientists and doctors?
Yes, I did.
Did you see the study from Canada there that showed the damage it's done when a very minute amount of mercury is put in proximity to brain cells?
I think it's hard to extrapolate that data to what actually happens in the clinical situation.
Well, every study that's been done, doctor, that you guys have put forth as showing that there's no correlation between thimerosal and autism doesn't say categorically that thimerosal doesn't cause autism. They never say that. Can you tell me right now, categorically, without any doubt whatsoever, that mercury in vaccines does not cause autism?
I think what I'd have to say is what the Institute of Medicine concluded is that the body of evidence neither allows you to accept
I want you to give
nor
me
reject.
I want you to give me a yes or no. Can you tell me? Can you say right now, just flat out, just say, can you tell me without any doubt whatsoever that the mercury in vaccines does not cause neurological problems or autism?
We can neither accept nor reject a causal relationship.
So what you're saying is you cannot tell me that. You cannot say categorically, can you?
We don't know one way or the other. But
so why are you keeping something in there if you don't know one way or the other? When you know that there's an epidemic of autism. If there's an epidemic of something, why do you keep it in there when you're not sure? Because every study I've seen flatly says you're not sure. You say you can't say yay or nay.
I think you have to consider the benefit that vaccines confer, and there's a definite benefit from influenza vaccine. And having an adequate supply of vaccine is very important.
Okay, well.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't trust that lady with my worst enemy, never mind my health or the health of my family and friends. But aside from the lack of trust issue, many people realize that the experts are not really experts on the topic of this new virus. They seem to be learning and experimenting as they go along. In fact, the CDC-owned website states, and I quote, "We are still learning how vaccines will affect the spread of COVID-19. The CDC will continue to update recommendations as we know more," end quote. And of course, it's simply too early to know what the long-term effects of the vaccines are. We'll just have to wait and see. But what we do know is that some of the vaccines are already having adverse effects on the body, causing potentially lethal blood clots. The CDC and the FDA put a pause on the distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine while they investigated, but ultimately they determined that the risk of COVID-19 was greater than the risk of getting blood clots, so they resumed the distribution of the vaccine without making any adjustments to the formula. But is anyone surprised that the Johnson & Johnson vaccines are mainly being distributed in poor urban areas? Maybe it's just a coincidence, but I don't know. But it seems to me that either way, we assume some risk, vaccinated or not. And after Dr. Anthony Fauci testified to Congress that the mortality rate for the virus may be as low as 1%, I decided to take my chances without the vaccine. But what choice are you going to make? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.